Good evening and welcome to this, which is the first of the iMEditate workshops, which will help you with kind of take control of your weight. And as I like to say, gaining the body you want. Good evening. Obviously, we're pre-recorded tonight. And this is probably going to unfold over several workshops. In fact, it will. I know we've asked whether we can explore weight management, eating habits, that kind of thing, and gaining the body you'd feel happier and more comfortable living in. And I'm deliberately saying gaining the body you want rather than simply losing weight, because I prefer moving towards something rather than spending all our time trying to get away from something. And partly because the number on a set of scales is rarely the whole outcome people actually want. What people usually want is to feel more comfortable in their body. They may want to move more easily. They may want more energy. They may want their clothes to fit differently. They may want to look in the mirror and feel more at home with the person looking back. And they may want to eat without feeling guilt, conflict, or that sense that food's controlling them. Um, they may want to feel that they're making choices rather than continually fighting themselves. So although we may use familiar language of weight loss from time to time, this is really about moving towards a different relationship with your body, your food, and yourself. Tonight is the first of several workshops that I intend to do around this. I'm not necessarily going to follow them on one after another. Um, it's not going to be one of like a program where you're given 7 different techniques in 7 weeks and barely have the time to try one before another's dropped on top of it. Each workshop will stand alone. Each will give you something particular to understand, explore, and most importantly, put into practice. Do it, because all this stuff only works if you do it. Knowing a technique is not the same as using it. And using a technique once is not the same as allowing it to become part of how you naturally think and respond. So tonight we're going to be beginning with language. Um, and I know we've all enjoyed language stuff in the past, so I'm hoping you'll enjoy this, and I hope you'll see that what we explore today, although we're looking at it in relation to weight, can also be applied to many aspects of life. So we're not looking at diets and eating plans. There are people out there that are qualified to do that. This isn't a list of forbidden foods. We're exploring the language used inside our own minds and how that language can either make change feel harder or begin making it feel possible. And you can take what we cover from tonight and actually use it. You can play with it. And I encourage playing with this stuff. That's how you really remember it and integrate it. You can experiment with it. You can notice what happens when you begin changing words through which represent the challenge to yourself. And perhaps you'll notice the change first in the way you think about food. Or perhaps you'll notice it in a particular choice you make. Or you may simply discover one day that something that used to feel like a battle has become a little easier. And whether you notice the change consciously or simply recognize it after it's already begun really does not matter. And for those of you that have done the language stuff with me, you'll know exactly what I did there. It's precisely the kind of language we're going to be exploring tonight, because before we go any further, this workshop, I need to say, is not medical or nutritional advice. Bodies are complicated. Weight can be affected by health conditions, medication, hormones, age, mobility, sleep, stress, environment, and many other things. If your relationship with eating involves an eating disorder, purging, severe restriction, binging, that feels uncontrollable, or anything that's causing significant distress that deserves appropriate professional support rather than just a few clever language patterns. That's not to say that they're not going to help and actually might make a lot of difference for you. But if somebody's watching this in the future and you're really struggling with some really intense stuff with around eating, do seek other help as well. Yes, I'm a trained hypnotherapist. I'm trained to help with this stuff, but I'm more about sharing tools that you can use and empower yourself with than actually kind of doing the fixing stuff nowadays, which I think you guys know. So what I'm going to do tonight is exploring how language can support change. It can't do everything, but it can do rather more than most people realize. We're already using hypnotic language. People often imagine hypnotic language as something a hypnotist does to somebody else. And they do. but it's not just that. They imagine a certain tone of voice, perhaps, Also, like if we're looking at hypnosis in general, a swinging watch whilst they're talking to you, someone saying you're feeling sleepy. But hypnotic language is not limited to formal hypnosis. We use language hypnotically, as some of you already know, all the time. We direct our attention with it. We create expectations with it. We rehearse future experiences with it. We turn repeated behaviours into fixed identities with it. And we give ourselves suggestions that we then live inside. Think about some of the things people commonly say when they're trying to change their body or their eating habits. I have no willpower. I always give in, or cannot resist chocolate. I'm an emotional eater. I'm useless at diets. I always start well and then fail. I've no self-control. I'm greedy. I'll never be slim. I only have to look at food and I put on weight. We've all heard these. People often say these things as though they're neutral observations, but they're not neutral. They're instructions about what to notice and what to expect. If I repeatedly tell myself, I always give in, and every time I give in, it becomes evidence that the statement is true. Every time I make a different choice, it gets dismissed as an exception. The mind begins collecting evidence for the suggestion it's been given. The words become a lens through which experience is interpreted. And after a while, the statement no longer sounds like something I sometimes do. It just sounds like, that's who I am. It's quite a powerful piece of hypnosis. Unfortunately, it's not particularly useful hypnosis. So tonight, therefore, is not about learning to talk positively to yourself while secretly believing something else. I'm not going to suggest that you stand in front of the mirror and say, I have the perfect body. If every part of you is shouting, no, you ain't, it's unlikely to create any useful internal response. It's not about pretending. It's about learning to use language that opens possibilities rather than closes them. Language that makes room for learning. Language that helps you turn a fixed problem into a changing process. So let's get on to our first pattern. Moving towards something. Let us begin with one of the simplest shifts. Listen to these statements. I must stop eating rubbish. I must not snack at night. I do not want to be this size. I need to get rid of this stomach. I know I find myself saying that. I must stop being lazy. Every one of these statements is directed away from something. The person knows that they do what they do not want, but knowing what you do not want does not necessarily give your mind a useful direction in which to move. And this is something sometimes oversimplified in NLP. You may have heard people say that the unconscious mind cannot process negatives. It's not quite true. You can understand the sentence, do not eat the biscuit. You know what it means, but in order to understand it, the biscuit still has to be represented. Attention is still being directed towards the biscuit, the eating, and the struggle not to do so. So, I would rather ask, what do you want instead? Not eating rubbish might become, I want to make choices that leave me feeling nourished and satisfied. Not snacking at night might become, I want to finish eating when I've had enough and feel comfortable until breakfast. Not being this size might become, I want to become more comfortable, mobile, and at home in my body. Not being lazy might become, I want movement to become a normal and enjoyable part of my life. Notice difference. We're not denying the unwanted behavior. We're giving the mind a direction. So here's your first exercise, and you may want to pause this recording and write this down. Choose one thing connected with eating, body, or health that you've been saying you want to stop, avoid, lose, or get rid of. Write the sentence exactly as you normally say it. Perhaps, I want to stop eating biscuits. I want to lose my belly. I don't want to feel breathless. I must stop ordering takeaways. I need to make a note of that one. Write whatever is true for you. And then once you've done that, ask, what do I want instead? Describe something you could move towards. What would you like to do? How would you like to feel? What would you like to become? Increasingly able to notice. What kind of relationship would you like to have with food? How would you like to inhabit your body? So rather than, I want to stop eating so much, you might write, I want to recognize when I'm comfortably satisfied and I find it natural to stop there. Rather than, I do not want to be unfit, you might write, I want to feel stronger and more comfortable when I move. Rather than, I must stop comfort eating, you might write, I want to discover a wider range of ways to comfort and care for myself. So if needs be, pause this, take a moment and write your towards statement. The wording does not have to be perfect. You can refine it later. What matters is that you've begun turning around. Instead of staring at what you're trying to escape, you're beginning to face the direction in which you want to travel. So let's move forward, presuming you've done that, from identity to behavior. The next distinction is enormously important. Listen to the difference between these two statements. I am an overeater. I'm an overeater. And there are situations in which I eat beyond the point at which I'm comfortably satisfied. The first is an identity. I'm somebody with an eating problem. The second is a behavior occurring in particular circumstances. When someone says, I'm an emotional eater, they take a strategy they've used and turn it into a definition of who they are. I'm greedy, I'm weak, I'm lazy, I'm addicted to sugar, I'm hopeless. Once something's become an identity, changing it is possible, but it can feel threatening. And because it feels threatening, we kind of go, oh, that might not be possible. You're no longer attempting to change what you do. You're trying to fight what you believe yourself to be. That's a big difference. It's a much larger battle. So one of the most useful questions we can ask is, when specifically does this happen? So I always overeat. Always? During every meal? Every mouthful? Every day? Or does it happen more often when you're tired? When you're alone? When you're watching television? When you skip lunch? When you're upset? When certain food is available? When you feel you've already broken the rules? As soon as we become specific, the enormous identity begins breaking down into manageable patterns. I have no willpower might become, I find it more difficult to follow my intention late in the evening when I'm tired. I mean, suddenly you're not battling with the whole day. You're battling, you've just got that little part of the day. That sentence gives us somewhere to work. You might not need to work on 3/4 of your day. It might be 2 hours of an evening that you need to change your behavior in. My God, that's easy. 2 hours a day. Go to bed earlier. Sorted. The person is not defective. There's a particular situation in which a familiar response occurs, and situations can be prepared for. Responses can be interpreted. New choices can be rehearsed. So take another look at the problem sentence you wrote. Does it contain the words I am? Is it defining you? Does it turn a repeated behavior into your identity? If so, change it into something you've been doing, not something you are. I am an emotional eater could become, I've sometimes used food to change how I feel. That word sometimes is useful. It creates expectations, and the words have used. Place the behavior somewhere in the past in time. It's something that has happened. It's not necessarily something that must continue happening. You might then add, I can begin discovering other ways to respond to those feelings. It's not an affirmation pretending everything's already solved. It's a statement of possibility and learning. Try changing your own identity statement into a behaviour. You're not lazy. There may be times when you do not move as much as you intended. You're not greedy. There may be times when you continue eating after hunger has passed. And you're not hopeless. There may be methods you've tried that did not suit you, or changes you are not yet ready to sustain. And this brings us, if you need to pause this, by the way, do pause and have a think and a ponder, or write some stuff down by all means. But I'm just going to keep moving on. So this brings us to another extremely useful word, the usefulness of the word yet. Consider, I cannot leave food on my plate. Now listen to, I've not yet become comfortable leaving food when I've had enough. The word yet changes the structure of the statement. The first sentence sounds final. The second describes learning. It's a process that's not been completed. Cannot control myself around chocolate. I've not yet learned the response I want when chocolate is available. Cannot stick to anything becomes, I've not yet found a way of maintaining this that works naturally for me. I hate exercise might become, not yet found forms of movement I genuinely enjoy. Yet does not promise that change will magically happen, but it's surprising how it can work. It refuses to declare that change is impossible. It keeps the door open. There is a great difference between saying, I cannot do this, and I cannot do this yet. One is a verdict. The other is a stage in a process. So notice where you've been using final language. Always, never, cannot, impossible. That's just me. I've always been like this. And begin becoming curious about whether the statement is completely true. Has there been an exception? Even a small one? Have you ever left food because you'd had enough? Have you ever made a choice you felt good about? Have you ever enjoyed moving? Have you ever interrupted a habitual response? Have you ever gone through an evening without needing the snack you usually have? We don't need to pretend the problem's not real. We are simply looking for evidence that it's not absolute. Because if there has been one exception, then the pattern is not an unchangeable law. It's a pattern with flexibility already inside it. So now let us look at some of the pressure words we use. I must lose weight. I should be exercising. I have to stop eating this. I must be good. I should have more discipline. How do you feel when someone tells you that you must do something? Even when that someone is you. For many people, must creates pressure. Should often creates guilt. And the moment we feel controlled, another part of us may want to resist. This is why people sometimes find themselves eating something almost rebelliously, even though there is nobody else in the room. One part says, oh, you must not eat that. Another part replies, watch me. Hypnotic language often works more elegantly by creating permission and choice. I can begin making choices that support the body I want. I am free to decide whether this is food is worth having. I can choose to pause before acting. I may discover that what I want in the longer term matters more than this passing urge. I can eat this if I genuinely choose to, and I can also choose not to. That last one can feel a little unusual. People often think change requires stronger rules, but sometimes permission removes the battle. If something is absolutely forbidden, it can become unusually interesting. If you're all... I should have got a drink ready for me. I haven't. I'm drying up. If you're allowed to choose it, you can begin asking whether you actually want it. There is an important distinction between I'm not allowed to eat this and I'm choosing whether eating this supports what I want. One positions you as a prisoner. The other positions you as the person making the decision. So take one of your must or should statements, pause this if you need to, change it into I can, I may, I'm learning to, I choose to, I am free to. Notice which wording feels genuine. You do not need to choose the softest possible language. Some people like, I'm committed to. That can be powerful when it comes from personal choice rather than punishment. For example, I'm committed to caring for my body through the choices I make regularly. That's a very different from I must be good. Turning the goal into a process here is another common problem. Losing weight or even gaining the body I want is an outcome, but it is not an action you could perform at 8:30 on a Wednesday evening. You cannot directly do weight loss, like weight loss. Look at me, I'm slim. Doesn't work that way. You can make a choice about what you eat. You can notice hunger. You can move your body. You can prepare food. You can go to bed. You can pause. You can ask for support. You can begin again after a choice you did not feel good about. The body changes as a consequence of patterns repeated over time. So useful hypnotic language should not merely command the final result. It should help the mind rehearse the process that contribute towards it. Rather than, I am going to lose 3 stone, you might begin with, I'm becoming increasingly aware of the choices that move me towards the body I want. Rather than, I will never eat chocolate again, you might use, I'm learning to enjoy food consciously and to recognize when enjoyment has become enough. Rather than, I will exercise every day, you might use, I'm making movement a more natural part of my ordinary life. The question becomes, what would someone moving towards your desired outcome actually do? Not perfectly, not every moment, but regularly. Would they notice hunger earlier? Would they eat more slowly? Would they shop differently? Would they pause before automatically reaching for food? Would they recover more quickly after an unplanned choice? Would they stop calling one meal a ruined week? Would they move their body in ways that feel possible and sustainable? Choose one process, only one. That's important. People often make change difficult by trying to change everything all at once. Tonight, I invite you to choose one small process that would contribute towards the body and relationship with food you want. Perhaps I want to pause before eating when I'm not physically hungry, or I want to recognize comfortable satisfaction sooner, or I want to change my evening food consciously rather than automatically. Choose my evening food consciously rather than automatically. Or I want to return to my intended pattern at the next opportunity rather than waiting until Monday. Pause the video, write down your process. Just that one that you're going to choose. That process is more useful to the unconscious mind than an enormous, distant outcome. It can be imagined, it can be rehearsed, it can be noticed, and it can be repeated. So now we come to one of the easiest hypnotic language patterns you can use on yourself. Questions. Questions direct attention. Ask, why am I so useless? And the mind searches for evidence of uselessness. Ask, why can I never stick to anything? And the mind begins assembling a history of failure. Ask, what's wrong with me? And you have instructed your mind to find all your faults. The quality of the answer is often limited by the quality of the question. So instead of asking why you're failing, begin asking questions that direct attention towards useful information. What was happening just before I made that choice? What did I actually need in that moment? What would make the helpful choice easier next time? What is the smallest useful action available now? When have I handled a similar situation differently? What am I learning about my patterns? How quickly can I return to what matters? How might I enjoy this food while eating an amount that leaves me comfortable? Notice that last question. It's not demanding deprivation. It presupposes that enjoyment and appropriate quantity can coexist. That's really useful hypnotic language. And here's some more. I wonder how soon I'll begin noticing the moment when hunger becomes satisfaction. I wonder which healthy meal I'll genuinely enjoy. I wonder whether movement will become easier first or more enjoyable first. I wonder what will remind me that I have a choice. I wonder how my body will let me know that it appreciates the changes I am making. These questions do not require an immediate conscious answer. They can just be allowed to sit. They tell the mind what kind of experience to begin noticing. And this is where language becomes more than positive phrasing. It becomes a search. So we're going to move on to something that I've covered before, presuppositions. A presupposition, I love presuppositions, is something accepted, you can be quite cheeky with them, something accepted within a sentence without being stated as the main point. Let me say that again. Presupposition is something accepted within a sentence without being stated as the main point. For example, when you begin noticing your changing relationship with food, the sentence presupposes that your relationship with food is changing. The only question is when you begin noticing. As making supportive choices becomes easier, presupposes that it will become easier. You may be surprised by which change you notice first. Presupposes that changes will be noticed. When you look back and realize how differently you now respond, presupposes a future difference. I love it. Presuppositions can be very useful. I need to get out more. But I do. This stuff's wonderful. It's like magic. Presuppositions can be very useful. In fact, it's proper spelling. Can be very useful, provided they remain believable. Little point in saying, when you awake tomorrow with the perfect body, because that's nonsense, and some part of the person knows it. Good hypnotic language stretches possibility without snapping credibility. So we might say, as you become, or as I become more practiced at pausing, when you begin recognizing satisfaction a little sooner, as the new choice becomes increasingly familiar, as eating healthier becomes easier and easier. You may notice that recovering from an unhelpful choice becomes quicker. These phrases do not demand instant perfection. They presuppose there's a bit of a journey, there's a bit of development. Try creating one sentence about your chosen process using one of these beginnings. You might want to jot them down and then pause this to do it. As I become increasingly, when I begin noticing, each time I practice, as this becomes more familiar, you may use I because you're writing it for yourself, obviously. For example, each time I pause before eating automatically, recognizing what I actually need can become a little easier. Or as I become increasingly aware of comfortable satisfaction, I can enjoy stopping at the point that feels right for my body. So pause the video, write your own down. I'm dropping a lot into this, which is why we're not going to do them back to back. I really want you to explore everything at depth that we're covering tonight. Because if you do that, you can begin to notice maybe sooner or later how it's becoming easier to take better control of moving towards that body that you want. So now we're going to look at something else that I love. We're going to look at double binds. We've looked at them before, but not in this context. So double binds, there's triple binds, but double binds are enough. Choosing how change happens is basically what that's about. We arrive at a pattern which, like I say, we've explored before. In everyday life, a double bind can mean being trapped between two impossible choices. And that's not what we mean here. In hypnotic language, we offer two acceptable pathways towards the same useful outcome. If you've done, which I know most of you have done, There might be people in the future listening to this. But if you've done any of the hypnotic journeys, it's riddled with double and triple binds. It's a journey through them. The choice, it's not whether change can happen with double binds. The choice is how it's going to begin. For instance, will you first notice yourself choosing smaller portions, or will you first notice that you naturally eat more slowly? Both options give positive direction, positive outcome. Will you become aware of satisfaction sooner during the meal, or discover that food becomes less interesting once you've had enough? Again, either pathway supports the same outcome. Will movement begin to feel more enjoyable, or will you simply enjoy how you feel after moving? Either is useful. Will you notice the pause before reaching for food, or will you become aware of your choice as your hand reaches towards it? The pattern assumes that awareness is developing. Here are some structures you can borrow. Will you first notice A, or will B become apparent first? You might want to jot these down. Will this begin happening during X, or will you be pleasantly surprised when it happens during Y? Will you discover that A leads naturally to B, or that B makes A easier? Will the change begin consciously, or will you only realize after your unconscious mind has already started making it? Be playful with these. There's a lot of fun with them. And like I say, all this stuff can be applied in your conversations with people and in other areas of your own life. They don't have to sound like formal hypnosis. You might say to yourself, I wonder whether I'll first become less interested in eating when I'm not hungry. I'm more interested in discovering what I genuinely need. Either direction changes your relationship with the habitual response. For your chosen process, create 2 useful routes. Stop the video, 2 useful routes that help you with that process. Suppose your process is, I want to pause before evening snacking. Your double bind might be, will I first notice myself pausing when the thought of food appears, or will I discover that taking one comfortable breath naturally reminds me to choose? If your process is comfortable satisfaction, will I first become aware of satisfaction through the feeling in my body, or through the moment the food no longer tastes quite as interesting? If your process is movement, a bit more exercise, will I first notice that moving becomes easier, or that beginning becomes more automatic? Pause the video, write your A and B down. Remember, both choices should lead somewhere useful. Will I succeed or fail is not a helpful double bind. Will I change today or never change is not a helpful double bind. The purpose is to give flexibility to the pathway while maintaining direction. And so now we're going to look at triggers, turning triggers into reminders. Most habitual behavior has triggers. A time of day, a place, a feeling, a person, a thought, the end of a meal, sitting in front of the TV, walking into the kitchen, finishing work, feeling bored, feeling lonely, feeling the day's been difficult and you deserve something. There's so many. The trigger itself is not necessarily the problem. The problem is that it's become connected to an automatic response. But hypnotic language allows us to begin linking the old trigger with a new moment of awareness. Listen to this. Whenever I notice myself thinking about food in the evening, that thought can become a reminder to pause and discover what I actually need. The old trigger remains, but instead of automatically leading to eating, it begins leading to awareness. Each time I open the cupboard without having consciously decided what I want, my hand on the door can remind me that I'm free to choose. Whenever I notice disappointment about a choice I've made, that feeling can become the signal to return at the very next opportunity. This one's particularly important. Many people have a pattern that goes something like this. They eat something they had not intended to eat. Then they tell themselves they've ruined the day. Because the day is ruined, they continue eating. Then they decide to begin again, tomorrow or Monday or next month. One choice becomes a chain of choices because of the meaning attached to it. Imagine changing the meaning. Instead of disappointment meaning I failed, it means this is just my reminder to return. The lapse itself becomes the trigger for recovery. So you might say, whenever I notice that I have moved away from my intention, noticing it can immediately remind me that the next choice is a new choice. That's a powerful pattern. Not because it creates perfection, because it shortens the distance between drifting and returning. So choose a trigger connected with your process. Then complete this sentence. whenever I notice, fill in the blank, that can remind me to fill in the blank. For example, whenever I notice myself eating quickly, that can remind me to place the food down for a moment and reconnect with enjoyment. Another, whenever I feel the urge to eat without hunger, that can remind me to ask what I'm hoping the food will change. Whenever I begin saying that I've ruined everything, those words can remind me that nothing is ruined and the next choice remains available now. Just pause the video, write yours down so you've got that in place. So now we're going to look at putting these patterns together, combining everything into a short piece of hypnotic language you can use. Does not have to be spoken in a hypnotist voice. You are going to sleep. I don't know why I started impersonating Arnie there. I have no clue. You can read it in the morning. You can record it on your phone. You can write it in a journal. I've got one up here on the wall here. In fact, I shall give it a read for you. This is to do with spirituality. As I increasingly step into the stillness, clarity, presence, and quiet power of my deeper mystical self, my mystical nature, in fact, and genuinely enjoy the peace and freedom and awareness this brings, what is it which I can do today that allows me to live more consciously, beautifully, and in alignment with the presence of the one than ever before? Just there, and I look at it and I read it at least once a day, and it's focusing my mind on that journey. So you can write, like I say, write in a journal. You can quietly say one part of it when the relevant situation occurs. The power's not in making it sound mysterious. The power is in repeatedly directing attention towards a useful process. So here's the first structure. First, acknowledge the old experience without turning it into an identity. This isn't who you are, it's just something you do. Second, state what you're moving towards. Feeling comfortable in my body. Thirdly, connect the old trigger to a new moment of awareness. Fourth, offer 2 useful pathways. That's your double bind. Fifth, presuppose that practice makes the response increasingly familiar. So let me give you an example. The original statement is, I have no willpower and I always eat rubbish at night. So we begin by making it specific. There have been evenings, particularly when I'm tired, when I've eaten automatically rather than choosing consciously, because it doesn't happen all the time. That acknowledges the experience, then the direction. I'm learning to finish the day feeling comfortable and satisfied, making choices that support the body I want. Then the trigger. Whenever the familiar thought of evening food appears, that thought can remind me to pause and notice what I genuinely need. Then the double bind. And I wonder whether I'll first discover that the pause itself changes what I want, or whether choosing consciously allows me to enjoy an appropriate amount and then stop. Then the development. Each time I practice recognizing the difference between hunger, habit, and another need can become increasingly natural. Put it all together, it becomes, there have been evenings, particularly when I'm tired, when I've eaten automatically rather than choosing consciously. And now I'm learning to finish the day feeling comfortable and satisfied, making choices that support the body I want. Whenever the familiar thought of eating food appears, that thought can remind me to pause and notice what I genuinely need. And I wonder whether I'll first discover that the pause itself changes what I want, or whether choosing consciously allows me to enjoy an appropriate amount and then stop. Each time I practice, recognizing the difference between hunger, habit, and another need can become increasingly natural. It's not a command to be perfect. It's not a declaration that you'll never snack again. It's a hypnotic language directing attention towards a moment in which a different response can become possible. Let me give another example. Original statement, I hate exercise and never stick to it, might be transformed into, I've not yet found a form and rhythm of movement that's become a natural part of my life. I'm learning to enjoy using my body in ways that help me feel stronger, freer, and more alive. Whenever I notice myself thinking that I should exercise, that thought can remind me to ask what form of movement would feel possible now. And I wonder whether I'll first notice that beginning becomes easier, or that enjoying how I feel afterwards makes me increasingly willing to begin. Every experience of moving in a way that suits me can strengthen the identity of someone who naturally includes movement in life. Notice that we've not said, I love exercise. Perhaps they don't. I'm not a fan of it. We've opened a process of discovering what movement can mean to them, to the person, to yourself. Now begin creating your own paragraph. You can use the template. There have been times, you might want to pause this and write it down. There have been times when, fill in the gap, and now I'm learning to, fill in the gap. Whenever I notice, fill in the trigger, that can remind me to fill that in. I wonder whether I will first, here's your double bind, or whether I will, and each time I practice, take time to write it. Pause the recording if you need to. Don't do it if you're feeling rushed tonight. Spend some time with this. It will pay back. Read back what you've written. As you read it, notice whenever, if any part of that creates a resistance. Does it make an unbelievable claim? Does it sound punitive? Does it tell you what you must not do? Does it assume perfection? Does it contain an identity you no longer wish to strengthen? Change any wording that does not feel right. The best hypnotic language is not necessarily the cleverest language. It's the language your mind can accept and begin using. And language is not the whole change. It's important to say that words alone will not prepare meals, move your body, organize your shopping, or change every environmental influence around you. But language affects the meaning you give to those actions. It affects whether you treat a difficult day as information or failure. It affects whether you approach change through punishment or care. It affects what you mentally rehearse. It affects whether you notice choice or feel trapped inside habit. And perhaps most importantly, it affects whether the challenge feels like unchangeable part of you or something you're learning to handle differently. The language should support action, not replace it. If you create a suggestion, whenever I notice I'm hungry, I make a nourishing choice, but your home contains nothing you regard as nourishing, you've made the choice unnecessarily difficult. If you want to move more, but have created a plan that requires 2 free hours you do not possess, language will not solve the practical contradiction. So after creating your hypnotic paragraph, ask one more question. What could I change around me to make this easier? Could you place certain foods somewhere less visible? Could you prepare something in advance? Could you use smaller bowls? Could you decide your evening choice before you become tired? Could you place walking shoes near the door? Could you ask somebody to join you? Could you remove one unnecessary obstacle? The inner language and the outer environment can work together. There's no virtue in making the helpful choice needlessly difficult and then blaming yourself when the difficult choice wins. For the final part of tonight, I'd like you to place, or whether you do it tonight or whether it's later on when you've got that happy paragraph that you're happy with, the one that you've written, somewhere where you can see it. Like I said, I've got one up there. You don't need to stare at it, simply know it's there. And when you do this, make yourself comfortable and you can close your eyes if that feels right, or simply soften your gaze. Take a comfortable breath, not an enormous breath, not a special breath, just a breath that allows you to pause for a moment. And remember that during this workshop, you've already begun changing the way you represent this challenge. Perhaps only slightly, but direction matters. You've begun moving away from fixed identity and towards learnable behavior, away from punishment and towards choice, away from enormous outcomes and towards the next useful process, away from failure and towards information and return. And you do not have to remember every pattern consciously. You may remember the one that matters most, or perhaps the right phrase will simply return when the relevant situation arises, because words can become reminders, thoughts can become signals, and old triggers can begin opening new moments of choice. You might imagine a familiar situation in which the old pattern would normally occur. Nothing too difficult, just an ordinary moment. Perhaps standing in a kitchen, finishing a meal, sitting down in the evening, thinking about movement, looking at a menu, feeling tired, and imagine noticing the beginning of the old pattern, not fighting it, not judging it, simply noticing. And as you notice it, allow the useful words you created to become present. Perhaps you hear them, perhaps you sense their meaning, perhaps you simply recognize that there's now a choice where previously there seemed to be only habit. Will you first notice yourself pausing, or will awareness arrive as the choice is being made? Will the new response feel obvious, or will you only realize afterwards that something happened differently? Will you discover that you want something different, or that you can respond differently even when the old desire briefly remains? There's no single correct way for learning to begin. What matters is that the old pattern no longer has to be the only pattern. Imagine making one useful choice, Just one. Notice how ordinary it can feel. It doesn't need to be all trumpets blazing. It does not need to be a heroic battle of willpower. It can simply be the next choice. A small expression of care for the body you are gaining. And then imagine another day, another opportunity. Perhaps the choice is different. Perhaps you do not make the choice you intended, and imagine noticing that without turning it into a verdict about yourself. The moment you notice becomes the moment you return. Not tomorrow, not Monday, at the next available choice, because the ability to return may ultimately matter far more than the fantasy of never drifting. Take another comfortable breath and allow your mind to consider this possibility. You do not need to become a different person before making different choices. Different choices repeated with care can gradually become part of who you know yourself to be. And you can begin with language, you can continue with action, and you can learn from what happens. In a few moments, you can bring your attention fully back to the room, taking with you the sentence you created, perhaps refining it later, revisiting it, re-listening to this, perhaps recording it, putting one part of it somewhere you will notice. And over the coming days, do not test yourself by asking, has this completely changed me? That question's too big. Instead, become curious. What am I beginning to notice? Where did I pause? What became a little easier? When did I remember that I had a choice? How quickly did I return? Small changes are still changes, and each time you notice one, you provide your mind with evidence that another way is possible. Begin becoming aware again of the surface supporting you, the room around you, the sounds nearby. Move your hands and your feet if that feels comfortable, and as you return fully, bring with you not a promise of instant transformation, but something far more useful, a language through which transformation can begin. And that's where we'll leave tonight's workshop. It's been the first of several occasional sessions exploring hypnosis, heating habits, and gaining the body you want. The next session may explore a completely different element, perhaps appetite, perhaps unconscious eating, perhaps emotional needs, perhaps motivation, or how we imagine the future body we're moving towards. There's no need to rush into the next thing. Use this one. Make it part of who you are. Notice the language you use. Catch the absolute statements. Catch the identities. Catch the musts and shoulds. Turn problems into process. Turn triggers into reminders. Ask questions that direct attention towards choice and create double binds in which every route leads somewhere useful. Do not have to use all of this perfectly. You'll first begin changing the words you use consciously. Or will you simply find yourself noticing the old language and becoming curious about a better way to say it? Either will do. Because noticing is already the beginning of change, and as you put this into practice, you may begin to discover for yourself just how much can change when you change the language through which change becomes possible. I hope you've enjoyed this. I've just dumped a whole load of really cool stuff on you. That's why we're not rushing it. We're going to literally revisit this and learn it and learn it and learn it, put it into practice in all aspects of your life to really notice the benefits. And in a few weeks' time, we'll visit another aspect of getting that body that we want. Much love, many blessings. See you all on Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.